Welcome to Lecture 5 on the cereal industry, Part 4. In this part of the lecture, we will talk about the crop rye. This is part of the agronomy subject, which is offered in the agricultural degree at North Melbourne Institute of TAFE, an education institution based in Australia. Please visit our website for any details about our subject or courses at www.nmit.edu.au. My name is Dr. Nikki Cooley. In order to complete this topic, you will also have to watch the other videos and lectures on wheat, rice, barley and sorghum. Rye, cereal, co-evolved as a weed with wheat and barley, originating in the Asia Minor area. It became a crop in Europe about 2000 BCE. It was associated with colder and drought tolerance compared to other grains. Rye can unusually for a cereal tolerate low fertile soils. In corn production, rye can be used as a nutrient scavenger to utilize excess nutrients. Ergot is a disease associated with rye and can lead to what is called ergot poisoning. Ergot is a hallucinogenic, and it is claimed that the Salam community many years ago were largely affected with this disease. Rye is a tall grass with multiple tillers. The inflorescence is a spike. It can be grown as either a winter or a spring annual in Australia. One of its physiological features is that it has an extensive root growth, and this enables it to be more drought resistant. It is best to graze when the plants are approximately 150 millimeters high and at tillering. The later stages of growth, however, are predominantly in the stem, and this is unpalatable to stock. Rye has several functions. It is a grain that can be used for bread, and it does not rise due to the low gluten. But it does allow large grain production, and this is used in the multigrain and the crisp bread industries. Rye can also be grown for the production of whisky. It is largely grown in South Australia, where it is used for drift soil maintenance or as a green manure or as a livestock feed. Rye cereal is generally not suited as a hay crop. Let us explore the erosion control in a bit more detail. As rye can adapt to the cold water logging, but it is also drought resistant and it can withstand sand blasts, means that it is very versatile, and these characteristics allow extensive soil binding. The grain is not preferred by sheep if there are alternative grains in the paddock. Post-harvest, the stubble is left to protect cover to reduce wind erosion, and it assists with the colonization of other species. Stubble degradation is slow compared to other cereals, so for these reasons it provides protection for some time. The following article, Cereal Rye, a crop for stabilizing erodible soils, will be available on Moodle. Please read this and make notes to complete the lecture content. Some additional notes on rye and animal feed. The feeding value of rye is between 85 to 90% of that of corn. It is higher than crops such as oats or barley. It has a high soluble fibre content, which makes it ideal for ruminants, but please do not give to young livestock, as it may result in digestive disorders. Dairy animals can feed on rye as a foliage, but they may have milk flavour affected. Rye can be sown between May and June. When you sow at this time, the recommended rate is 40 to 50 kilograms per hectare. That calculates to about 140 to 160 seeds per metre squared. The sow depth depends on the soil type. If you have heavy soils, then sow between 2 and 2.5 centimetres. If they are lighter, however, between 3.5 and 4.5 centimetres is ideal. You can sow dry during March in the mallee, and if you do so, the recommended rate is between 80 and 100 kilograms per hectare. If you are using your crop as a green manure, then sow February to March or as late as August if you have high rainfalls in the area that you're sowing. The nutrient requirements for rye are similar to that of wheat. It is recommended that you pay particular attention to phosphorus and nitrogen. If grown in the Mallee region, for example, at sowing, it is recommended that you put down 10 to 15 kilograms per hectare of phosphorus and at the same time 10 to 20 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen. You may need to top up with nitrogen throughout the growing season if there are signs of deficiency in the crop. In the paddock, rye plants aren't affected by insects very much. However, when the grain is harvested, insect control can become a problem. There are 3 steps you can take. 1 is store the grain at less than 10% moisture. 2, store in sealed silos. And 3, use chemical spray with periodic inspection about every 2 to 3 months to ensure that infestation is not around. When growing rye in the paddock, one disease you need to be aware of is ergot, although it is not seen typically in the Mallee and Victoria. If you do observe this disease, it is worth noting that it can result in significant livestock loss, so action must be taken. Stem and leaf rusts are problematic, and in certain climates, in certain years, they can become significant problems. The harvest date is usually around the same time as wheat. Although inflorescence and bolting stage is much earlier than wheat, the grain maturation can take longer. The harvest date for grain is based on both grain moisture and texture, that is, the grain is to be hard. It is worth noting that seed losses due to shattering can occur as soon as it ripens. Therefore, you must monitor and be prepared to harvest at the right time. Rye is harvested with a conventional header. The grain is lighter and longer than wheat, so minor adjustments to this machine may be required. Rye is a grain that can be used in the bread industry. It is smaller and darker than wheat, and hard to mill compared to wheat. It also produces a low percentage of flour compared to wheat. The hectolitre weight range is between 70 and 75 kilograms, with a minimum of 70 and a maximum moisture of 12% for marketing purposes. The grain protein tends to be lower than that of wheat. The dough lacks the elastic properties of the wheaten dough, and the bread made from rye has a close texture with a characteristic tang. The Australian demand for rye tends to be an elastic and a static market. Domestic consumption is currently sitting about 25,000 tonnes per annum. The Victorian markets tend to concentrate on curbed rye or cracked grain for the use in mixed grain breads or breads that require more fibre. There has been in recent years an increase for sourdough rye bread, rye flour and rye meal. When there is short supplies in the domestic market, this tends to be picked up by the Canadian market. Rye is referred to as a price-sensitive market. That means as a producer you need to be very aware of this aspect of growing rye. Grain buyers or merchants purchase cereal rye and are advised to explore their available options before committing to producing the crop. Prices fluctuate according to supply and demand. Australian rye crop distribution tends to be located predominantly in southern Australia, as they grow about 70%. Another region that grows rye is the Mallee region. This grows about 80% of Victorian rye. The map on the screen is produced by the FAO and it demonstrates the world production. As you can see, Australia sits as quite a low world production, being in pink, compared to other countries as Russia. Poland produces the largest amount of rye, followed closely by Russia and Germany. Australia tends to sit at below 2% of the world production. The following graph shows Australian rye production from 1960 through to 2013. As one can see, that the market is usually quite static, although does fluctuate occasionally according to price demand. Rye growing areas and harvests have diminished by about half in the last 8 to 10 years. This has ranged from 3,500,000 million tonnes over 30,000 hectares in 1961 to 15,000 metric tonnes on 100,000 hectares in 2005. Rye seems to be the least significant cereal crop for production, but crop improvement techniques are still being used to increase yields and defeat pests. Modern harvest equipment is not built to manage the significant height of rye, and the lack of dwarfing varieties have led to the decline in its production. Compared to the global tonnage, Australia produces a low quantity of rye. This ranges from 0.4 to 1.8 tonnes per hectare. So to summarise the information that we have gained from this lecture, we have learnt most importantly that rye is a price-sensitive market, that the market seems to be static and on the decline from both an Australian and a global trend perspective. Rye has many functions, and perhaps its most useful is as a green manure and to ensure and to reduce soil drift, a problem that can be experienced specifically with respect to wind erosion. It has many industry requirements, from animal fodder through to the bread industry. Please ensure, if you are going to grow this crop, that you are familiar with the quality requirements. The management requirements seem relatively low from an input perspective compared to other cereals. It tends to suffer from reduced pests and diseases, although storage of grain can be a problem. This brings us to the end of this lecture.